Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about threat hunting. It's kind of an unusual topic, more advanced topic if you will, for what we usually cover, but I had a chance to sit down and talk with a couple other folks who are senior in the industry and talk through some of the interesting things that they have found with threat hunting, especially as it relates to ICMP. It became a topic that kind of sprung up, and what I would like to do today is kind of synopsize, kind of put in a capsule some of the things that we talked about with a little bit of philosophy about some of the hunting around ICMP as well. And before I dig into that too far, it was interesting that this discussion really started with myself and three other seniors, as well as a smaller audience of folks more junior in the field. And it was funny on which side thought ICMP was still a threat. From the senior perspective, many of us were like, yes, ICMP is still a legitimate channel, it's still a legitimate hunting item, and yet on the junior side, they were more of the thought that it wasn't, that it was an older issue, that it was no longer prominent or something really necessary to perform as part of a regular threat hunting activity. It was more something you would do every once in a while or just put in some very basic monitoring rules for. And it really couldn't be farther from the truth. It actually remains an item that gains constant scrutiny, both from the cyber actor side and from the defender side. In fact, there are plenty of modern examples of ICMP malware, ICMP techniques being used by cyber actors out there, one of which would be Pingback, which I think was a May 2021 discovery, but it's far from the only one. Ryuk, Hansator, TrickBot, the list kind of extends a little bit, especially as you go back in 2020 and earlier, of malware that is decided either by bringing in a tool that uses ICMP to enumerate a network or using it as a means to exfil or use for command and control. It's kind of a pretty decent list of things that you can do with ICMP. And because it's frequently overlooked, or it's not really made part of the normal set of things that you hunt for, it works many times as an effective channel, especially for particular cyber actors. There are definitely divisions in cyber actors, just like there are divisions in defenders and intelligence analysts and cybersecurity specialists who think that one way is better than the other. So just same thing on the cyber actor side. Some of them believe ICMP is still effective, some of them don't. Some integrate it into their malware, their techniques, some do not. And so you kind of have some divisions in there, just like on our side of the house. And that's always important to keep in mind, because on the intelligence side, that helps us profile and understand who might be using this as a valid technique. And of course, there's some variance in there. You have to segregate who actually knows how to do this properly and is employing it because that's a technique that they're familiar with and have built into their malware or into their procedure profile, and those who have just adopted it because they either purchased it and it's part of something, or any of the other likely situations that would put them in a separate category where they only use it because they acquired it, basically. But that's kind of a separate topic, and I'll pause from there. I really want to keep on hunting. So again, my goal here is to kind of synopsize some of the things that we covered, touch on a few things, talk about some frustrations, and then really target how you can detect this kind of activity within an enterprise. In fact, that's probably one of the key things that we found out there, is that there were tons of examples. There was plenty of ways and discussion about ICMP tunneling, ICMP used to enumerate networks and look inside and find things and so on. But none of them really match the problem space that the majority of people have to struggle with. Frequently, the articles, the examples, the PCAPs, everything that's provided comes from this perspective that you already know the victim, you already know activity is there, and it's merely a matter of chasing that down, and then you can articulate and detail out all your findings and so on. And that's rarely the truth in a large environment. You have this network of 3,000, 5,000, or 10,000 or more computers with equivalent amounts of network traffic, and you're going, okay, hey, I need to hunt for ICMP. How do I start? Where do I begin? I only have a certain amount of time that I can dedicate to this. I want to make it part of my profile, but where do I begin biting this elephant into smaller and smaller bites so I can actually handle this? Because it is a tough problem when you look at it that way. If I'm I don't have the convenience of being able to approach it from the perspective of I already know the victim, I already know what's going on. There is a tiny subset of computers I have to look at, and okay, I need to piece this traffic out. No, I'm looking at hundreds, if not millions of rows of data in logs, and I have to be able to pull out that, and that's just the ICMP traffic. I have to pull that out and understand it in a way that I only spend the right amount of time digging into the ICMP traffic I have in order to actually find what I'm looking for, or rule out that it's not there. Rule out that it's not present. See if I can say this right. So those are big problems, and many times that's the actual problem space that you're trying to find a solution for versus, okay, is ICMP tunneling there? Can I build a monitoring rule? Sure, those are all very valid things, but those are very basic, if you will. Once you get to that point, it's like, okay, now that I have all this data about ICMP, how do I actually find out whether I have a problem or not? And how do I do that at an enterprise level versus a small network or a tiny example that I can usually find everywhere? So that's where this next piece kind of comes in. You need to resolve a couple core items to approach that with any kind of success. And I'm just gonna make a note here. This is gonna touch on philosophy. I've kind of unified all the philosophical items that all of us talked about. Each of us comes from a different place, so we all have different philosophies of hunting and how we look at things, but we all had certain things that we agreed on, so I've kind of generalized it into this reversed triangle here. So this upside down triangle kind of encapsulates a lot of the things that we talked about. It may or may not match identically, and probably won't, your philosophy on hunting. Just keep that in mind. Take from it what you can to modify into your own. If you don't have a philosophy, if you don't understand what I mean about hunting philosophy, take a second and research that, because it actually will impact you very powerfully as you become more skilled on the hunting side of the house. If you haven't thought through how you're hunting, why you're hunting, where you're hunting, and what you actually define as hunting versus, say, analysis or intelligence work or so on, take a time to do that before you get too far down the road, because it can make a world of difference. I'll pause there. So in this case, back on ICMP tunneling and ICMP traffic, if you're looking for malicious or problematic ICMP, because it can be just configuration problems too that you might want to police up as part of your hunting process, there's a couple core items you're going to have to resolve. One is you need to be able to hunt in that large sea of data. So if you have a good sized network, you have a sea of data. You have a lake if you don't have an ocean or more of just data. And so part of that answer is going to be getting the right tool. But it's only a partial answer. It doesn't matter how many tools you buy. It doesn't matter how many people you hire that are skilled in the use of those tools. It will only be a part of the answer, because you need to know how to use the tools correctly. You need to, and when I say correctly, I mean use them to find the answer that you're looking for, or to rule out that what you're looking for doesn't exist, or any of the other things that you need to ask questions about. And if that's too vague, let me be clear. You can't search for ICMP tunneling, for example, without the capability to look at network traffic. And so if you get tools that allow you to look at network traffic, everything from NetFlow down into PCAP, and you can get into session data, that's excellent. Even if you hire people that are trained to do all those things, again, very excellent. But you still have to know when and where and then what to look for. Because some things need to be looked for every day. Some things need to be looked for on a less regular basis, maybe once a month, maybe on a weekly issue, or maybe only when certain events prompt it. And of course, after you figure out the when, you need to go into what to look for in the first place and where. In this case, the what is definitely wrapped around ICMP, but if you're in the crowd, like a majority of our juniors were in our little colloquy, they thought that that was not even something to care about, which again shows you that you don't know what to look for necessarily. So keep that in mind. You can only, getting back on topic, tools will only partially arm you to answer and answer and be able to mobilize how to hunt in a large sea of data. You also need to know philosophically and knowledge base wise what to look for, when to look for it, where to look for it, and so on. You need to be able to answer those. And don't worry, I'll get to our upside down triangle here in a second. It's part of this next paragraph. So generalizing everything across all of us, it really came down to there's an inverse pyramid of complexity and time around hunting. You can make exact, let me say this a different way. When you know exactly what to look for, where to look for it, the amount of time you'll spend is very small, because you know exactly what to look for and you know exactly where to go. the complexity behind building a detection and being able to act on it is low because you have everything you need. In most examples online, you have a small PCAP with a very tiny network, and it's very easy to know what to look for because they're priming you. That's kind of the point. The introductory articles are introducing ICMP tunneling and outlining how it's being used, or they're introducing a piece of malware that uses it in X fashion. So you get all the what and the wheres very quickly. But that's rarely the problem you have in reality. Reality is you have a large network with a large enterprise amount of data and network traffic, and you don't know exactly what to look for or exactly where, which is why the amount of time involved always goes up, as well as the complexity. So that second bullet there, the second bullet is all about you need to have flexible broad detection, so very general detections that you can refine down into razor sharp narrow ones. And so spoken again, you need very broad flexible detections that can help you begin to isolate out what you need, and you need to be able to take that down to as exact as possible, defining the what and what you want to find and where you want to find it at. That is actually the chief way, and the problems all in front of you when you deal with an enterprise hunting system. And so part of this is, as far as core items to resolve, some of the things you need to answer to be successful, especially with ICMP hunting, is you need to be able to break down the where. So I always start at the highest level and go down, because even if I know exactly what and where, it's only going to be for an isolated instance. I mentioned Pingback earlier. In Pingback, they're taking advantage of ICMP and the ability to add things to the packet in order to pass things in plain text. That's awesome. Knowing that and knowing how it works, I can know the what. I can define out what commands are typically passed by observing that activity. The article may introduce it all to me, or I can reverse the malware and get that information. Now I know what, and I kind of know where, in the sense that it's in ICMP traffic, and I can know what kind of ICMP traffic. And now I can start really digging into the fact that it's being used mostly outbound and inbound. So it's outbound traffic and then inbound coming back. So now I can begin to break down the general where location. I already have all the what because I have reversed or I have followed direction from an article. Now I need to go isolate the where. And stepping away from Pingback for a second, at a very high level, the highest level of general you kind of want to go is inbound, outbound, and lateral. Again, we're talking very specifically about ICMP here. I'm looking at network traffic. I need to know if it's coming in, if it's going out, or it's going back and forth inside my network. It's very, very important. And under each one of these, you're going to further refine where you're going to look. Because the what in this case we've already defined. We know we're looking for ICMP traffic. Specifically, we're interested in ICMP tunneling. So we're going to refine both the what and the where in the next set of slides so that you can actually tackle an enterprise level problem. So let's talk more about the general what. So that was the general where. Let's go back to general what for a second, or let's talk about that. First thing I'm going to tell you is build a picture of normal. You need to know what normal looks like inside your network. Now, the normal for your network is not the normal for mine. It all depends on how big your network is and how busy it is and how much activity you're allowed. And many other variables that I'm not going to bother trying to describe because there's a lot of them. You need to understand what normal is. You may be asking yourself, I don't know how to do that. Well, the short answer to this is normal. You can figure out normal by measuring your traffic through this very tool or series of tools you're going to be using to do your hunting in most cases. So if you have something that lets you see network traffic from a Netflow level, such as a Stealth Watch or something like that, or if you have a Netwitness appliance or something equivalent that lets you look at network traffic, you can start picking up what my normal ICMP traffic looks like. Now, to a certain extent, that means defining what assets are noisy, what assets are quiet, what assets should not be talking, what assets should be allowed to talk. So that kind of crosses over into the where a little bit, but it's still very appropriate to understanding the general what, because you can't ask that question of, do I have malicious ICMP tunneling or ICMP traffic going on without understanding what the normal looks like to contrast against. So you need to build that picture. If the general volume, for example, of ICMP traffic laterally inside your network is a certain amount, and you know that on, say, certain days it's lower than others, but it's higher on other ones, there's peaks and valleys, you can measure that out so that you know what you should be seeing. Then you can start looking for anomalies to it, because anytime you get a spike of difference, you can then flag it. Or anytime you get a massive dip or something, that can tell you that the assets went offline. That's normal network monitoring, normal pieces, but that's something that you as a threat hunter or someone who's going to be doing cybersecurity and actually perform hunting activity need to have access to, or at least have someone give you that kind of information, so that when you're performing your checks, you're performing your hunting, you can actually understand what the baseline looks like. Because until you have it, it's kind of hard to do a diff to it. Okay. Another part of generalizing the what is, before you go looking for tunneling and things, is understand what are conversations and what are just one-sided door knocking or one-sided activity. So one-sided outbound ICMP may be nothing, or it could be everything. It's kind of hard to say, but I will tell you that an ICMP conversation back and forth, inbound and outbound, is completely different and something higher priority to look at. So anything that's a no response activity where you got a reset, or you got a ICMP error code back that says, hey, there's no destination or anything like that, you can separate out those for later analysis and really start focusing instead on conversations. And that'll help you understand the what better, because if I as a cyber active place malware inside your network and I'm using it as a command and control channel, there will be a conversation. It will be back and forth. If someone pinged a website from a host inside the network, it may be one-sided, or it may be a short-lived conversation. But a short-lived conversation is very different than, say, a 4-hour one. And we'll get into that a little bit more on the where. But it's very valid. And I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit, but you want to remove things like destination unreachable in similar situations, because you're just getting an error. Now, those don't need to be done away with. They're just pushed down as far as the priority of what to look for first. Now next, getting back to where, remember, we're going from general down to exact here. You want to filter out traffic in areas that you don't need. So earlier I mentioned things that should never talk. Well, there's definitely going to be things that will always talk. One of those is going to be your security tools. So if you have, for example, a FireEye appliance or something equivalent that is doing sandboxing or that is doing testing, it might be detonating things, it might be allowing ICMP out that's malicious, you don't want to flag on that appliance, because it's pointless. You're just wasting your hunting time looking at something that is an expected activity. So you want to isolate out all those things from any data you might look at, so that you don't spend time on it you don't need to. Which, while I'm on it, you really need an asset model. If you don't have an asset model, you absolutely need to build one. You cannot hunt effectively without an asset model. You can look all over the place and you'll have a scatterbrained shotgun approach, but you will not find consistently and consecutively problems and eliminate them without an asset model. You have to know what's there. Now, it's very hard. Most people think that you can solve this with a tool. You cannot. You can only partially solve it with a tool. You have to iteratively work on this, because assets are not stagnant. They're constantly changing. One of the ways you can do this, and I'm very familiar with enterprise environments, and commonly what happens is there are various teams who take care of this that are not you, and you end up relying on them to send you updates to data, like I have new assets, I lost assets. That's the worst way to do it, because you're always behind. But that's the typical way, because that's bureaucracy in large companies. Things you can do is, in your network review, you can build your own asset and model to keep abreast of things and also sync with theirs as they send you data, these other teams, so that you can keep a more modern, updated version going for your use. And part of that is doable by understanding what assets are talking. So in asset models, for example, you want to identify where all the mail servers are, where all the DCs are, where all the proxy servers are, where all the web servers are, where different assets that say belong to certain buildings or certain sections are, so that you can understand where things are both kind of physically and also logically in the network, which ones might be on different segments and so on. It kind of grows from there. You can see that many times very directly because you're seeing the network activity coming out of them. So it's easy to kind of pull out things that are mail servers or web servers or XYZ server, because you can see the kind of traffic flowing to and to and from it. That allows you to help build that asset model that you can then make more accurate and infuse as you get data from these other teams. I mean, that's generally how the best approach I've found when it comes to enterprises are. And that's what we're talking about here, is an enterprise approach. Something that has got thousands, if not more, tens of thousands of devices that you have to juggle. Not, I've got 100 machines in a network. You don't need to worry about things like that in that one as much. And in there, while you're at it, identify your IP ranges and what they're called. Know what the nomenclature is, and also know your IP ranges, both the ones you have internally and ones that you may have in a unified method with some kind of cloud service, so that if you're doing using IPs out of AWS or other locations and they're static, you want to identify them. If they're being pulled dynamically, you want to have a way to identify them as quickly as possible so that you can see them when you're hunting. They'll help you understand where to look. You don't want to waste time looking in things that don't matter. You want to look specifically in the places that do. And while I'm on it, define your bloody high priority assets. If you don't know what that means, I'm talking about things that are usually called crown jewels. These are elements of your network that, if they were taken offline or damaged or hurt in some fashion, could render your business impossible to do its normal day-to-day activities. So in some cases that's email, sometimes that's your DNS server, sometimes your entire network, it could be your AD server, whatever. There's so many things that are in the high priority assets. It could be your financial server, it could be where you do your backups. All those are high priority assets that you absolutely don't want to have drop offline or have issues, because they will cause problems to your business in its day-to-day activity. And at the same time, as you're defining those in your asset model, you're looking at things that shouldn't be. For example, since we're talking ICMP, your backup server probably shouldn't be spitting out hours and hours of conversations over ICMP. That's a bad thing if that's happening, for example, which is why that bullet is there. There should be parts of your network that you can define that will never exchange data. And it may not just be higher priority assets. I've put that there as a sub-bullet, but really it could be you have darkened areas of your network, areas that are not allowed to exchange data externally. So you should only see east-west lateral type traffic there. If you see outbound or any kind of north-south activity, you know you have a problem that you want to go chase after. That's exactly why you're hunting. So keep that in mind as you're refining the what and where, and let's talk a little bit more refinement here. So let's say you do all those things, you have your asset model, you figured out what you're looking for and when, and you know where you're going to be looking to a greater extent. And at this point, you still have a lot of traffic. This is very normal. I might pull out, say, 3 hours worth of traffic, and after I've refined it with all this information and really focused it, I still may have hundreds of thousands of lines I need to look at of things that are like possible issues that need to be hunted through. So at that point, I need to further break down what to do so that I can only spend the amount of time necessary in the right areas, and I don't spend a lot of time looking at things that really are nonsensical traffic. That is completely fine. Now, no matter what you do, you will do a certain amount of that. I'm pointing off to the side at this nonsensical pile of crap that you know is going to show up. You will have to go through a number of that until you get the good picture of normal done. And then you can isolate out things that are okay sessions to have, even if they're lengthy. You know, it might be okay that there's a 4-hour ICMP conversation going on because that's an expected normal thing in your network because of some of your configurations. Cool. But when you see that on the wrong asset, that's a different problem, which is why this bullet is number 1. So I've got 4 bullets here. There are 4 major things. I kind of have them in the order of approach that you need to pay attention to, in my opinion, but that's all it is. It's an opinion. Like everything else, adjust, adapt, shift, make it make sense to your problem so that your solution also is accurate to your problem. So for me, length of session is always one of the first things I key on. So after I do all my refinement and I get to this point where I have a big pile of data, I look at my smaller C, hopefully. Maybe it's just a big old pond at this point, but usually it's still a small C. I look at then conversations that have a long session. Now, if you have a tool that splits session like Netwitness, you're going to have to look across multiple sessions and look at sizes as well. But you really want to start at, okay, this is a conversation. How long has it been going on? So if I have an ICMP conversation that's been lasting for days and days and days, once I verify that data is true, I'm going to go look at that because that's a big problem. That's not what ICMP is supposed to do. So it's automatically an anomaly and something you want to go look at. There are use cases where that's a legitimate thing. And again, once you have a picture of normal, you should have those in your back pocket. Anything outside of those should be something that needs to be reviewed and either moved over there or definitely handled as whether it's suspicious or problematic. But you definitely want to look at those long sessions, followed by volume of bytes sent. So in the session, there's an amount of data going back and forth. If there's a large amount of volume of bytes, large amounts of data going back and forth, absolutely needs to be looked at. Absolutely, because a normal ICMP packet size is small, which I'm going to make this point right now. If this is meant for more advanced audience, so it's not apprentice level, it's not even junior level necessarily, and I'm including, without trying to bother to explain, that you already know ICMP and what it's supposed to do. I'm not going to redefine what ICMP is. You can go look that up. That's pretty straightforward. At this point, you should know what ICMP is used for, what its normalized activity is, and have a picture of that in your back pocket in front of you, actually, to understand when I say, hey, if you have a large volume there, there's something going on. That could be everything from you have UPnP open on a router and it's a small network, or you have something inside of your network that is putting out a lot of information that maybe it shouldn't, because typically that kind of volume indicates a large amount of transfer. And that's a very normal indicator for malware exfiltrating or malware shooting commands back and forth, and there's a lot of chatter. Same thing for average types sent. So what we're talking about here is basically you're counting the number of sessions, and you have a lot. So you take that big volume of data and you split it up over sessions. If you have a large amount, you need to focus on that as well. Obviously it's sub these other two, but that's another thing to trigger on. And the same thing for max packet length. So if you need to measure packets, so large packets are problematic because ICMP has no need for large packets. So if you're seeing a lot or even a small amount, but in clusters or in frequency of large size packets, then that's a problem. That's something to go chase after. And at a network, you can use these 4 things to really refine down the amount of data that you need to look at. Now, it's hard to do this with a great example. And I love examples, but this one's tough to do because everybody's enterprise network uses different tools and approaches this a little different. That's why I've generalized it across these 4 areas and the areas before this, so that you can take a look at whatever XYZ tool you're using and kind of come up with, okay, I can look at session data. Okay, now I need to get into how many sessions can I look at? How many sessions are happening from one asset to another? Because you're not just going to do this in isolation. Remember, you've already defined your assets. So you're going to go and go, okay, this asset that should not be talking is talking. That's an easy one. This asset that can talk, but normally doesn't talk in large amounts, somehow has several lengthy sessions. I want to go investigate that. That's a valid hunt. Or I see a lot of activity there. It's not outside the norm necessarily, but it's at the high end and it's happening on a regular basis. You're looking at frequency at that point and volume of bytes sent. And you're like, okay, I've got different things I need to go chase after. And you should be able to use that to bubble those problems to the top to hunt to. And then after we resolve those, look down into your smaller use cases for more problems. And typically you're balancing this against time. So you always want to look at the most possible thing the most possible detection you can make first, and then kind of go down the pecking order, which is why I've done it this way. So this is kind of a part 1. I'm going to stop here. This is a part 1. I'll continue this with a part 2 because there's more to talk about with this. But really think through this and think about your tools. Part of the reason I'm not force feeding it is you're more senior than the normal audience here. You should have a lot of this under your belt. So I'm making some assumptions, like you know what ICMP is, for example, and you kind of know what your normal in-network is, and you can build an asset model where you know you have one available. Those are good things. Those are things you should do. If you don't have those things done, you should probably get those if you can. You know, it's one of those things where, again, being realistic, it's a balance of time. And so this is where outside help can sometimes make the difference. If you can leverage that into your budget and things like that, have somebody come in and do this for you on a regular basis if you can't afford to do it yourself as far as time goes. Because you don't always have all the employees you need and the time to use them to get the information you need to be successful. But you absolutely need this if you're going to perform any kind of hunting activity. So again, more on this to come. I'll talk about some other things. If I can find some good examples, we'll put them up there. But the issue with providing good examples at an enterprise level is, 1, it's lengthy. It would take hours potentially to really dig out and do a good breakdown. And 2, there's no way to do that kind of example without giving away a lot of internal information about your enterprise. Because think about what we just talked about: assets, locations, your IP ranges, your normals, right? You have your baselines and benchmarks for what you should see. All those are powerful indicators on the inside of your network and how it performs and how it can be gotten around. So tough to share. But you can generalize things like I've done, and hopefully you find this helpful. And I'm going to pause here, and hopefully I see you in part 2 of this. So have a good one.